Hello, I'm Robb Martin, the founder and president of Mindshift Coaching and Consulting. We're a talent optimization company, and we combine science and software to help organizations get the most out of their people. We do that in a number of ways. We align people and the strategy with the business strategy, and we give managers tools so they can keep their people engaged. And we make sure the organizational structure is aligned to make sure we get maximum productivity. So that's kind of what we do for a living. We work with companies throughout Ohio, Western Pennsylvania, Indiana. That's about the extent of it. I am pleased to be here today with Clark Harvey, and we are on Who Are You?
Well, thank you, Rob, and I'm going to introduce you and brag on you even a little bit more here. Welcome to the Who Are You podcast, a project that explores how to understand and live out your life's purpose. In this limited series, we will interview people whose unique experiences and insights will increase your self-awareness and help you live a more meaningful life. Each episode will address one of the following themes: how to figure out what you want, what to do when you figure it out, how to deal with setbacks along the way, how to excel and accelerate your career path, and what to do when you've made it. Today's guest is Robb Martin. Robb will help us figure out what we want in life. Given Robb's extremely interesting career path and his ability to connect with individuals on a deep level, including me, Robb is the ideal person to learn from if you're hoping to live a life full of meaning, purpose, and impact. Robb has a unique ability to make connections between unrelated concepts as well, and he can relate well to others, like I said. Sometimes when I speak to him and he's offering me advice, I'm pretty overwhelmed by the level of insight and wisdom that he's giving me. Here's a little bit more information about Robb. Robb is the owner of Mindshift Consulting, and since 1999 has worked with corporate clients throughout Ohio, Pennsylvania, Indiana, and Michigan. He's been an organizational effectiveness specialist consultant for the Perry Nuclear Power Plant, Beta Labs, and the Nuclear Fuels Group, a senior lecturer in the management department at the University of Akron, Kent State, and John Carroll, where he facilitates learning on topics of leadership, strategic management, entrepreneurship, and human resources. A recent 2-term president of the 450-member Akron Area Society for Human Resources Management, owner of Martin Investment Properties with rental properties throughout Summit County, which is in the Akron, Ohio area. And he's also just busy with so many other things. So it's tough to get on his calendar, but when you do, it's totally worth it. He previously served as the executive director and COO of The Chapel. Prior to joining The Chapel, he was the VP for retail investments for Ohio at National City Bank for 7 years. Robb and his wife have owned 4 businesses, not 1, not 2, not 3, but 4 businesses ranging from manufacturing to retailing in the Akron area, such as Case Farms, North Coast Latex, Martin's Hallmark Shops, and Austin Leasing Company. He instructs the SPHR PHR prep course for the University of Akron and the GPHR prep course for Slippery Rock University. He has served as a senior lecturer on strategy, coaching, leadership, and management at the University of Akron, Kent State, and John Carroll University. Educationally, he's done a lot there too, which shouldn't surprise you at this point. He has an executive MBA from Kent State and a master's in positive organizational development and change from Case Western University, and recently completed a program in neuroleadership from NYU. How many degrees in neuroleadership from NYU do you have, Cecily?
I have 0.
0. Oh, okay. I thought you had 1.
But Cecily has practical life experience, and that counts just as much.
So I have like 10 in that mind.
Producer Dave, how many neurological degrees did you say you had earlier in this call?
I don't know if I can say neurological. I'm surprised I can pronounce that. So none.
Okay. Well, I think we should lean into that and learn a little bit more about that.
Yeah, Dave, you're selling yourself short. You're in the sports industry. You have a degree, believe me.
In addition to all those things, he has certifications and designations, because why wouldn't he? He has the SPHR, GPHR, SCP, CRPS, and CRPC, probably also the ABCDEFG. He is certified in 360-degree feedback, MBTI, FibroB, and Harrison assessments, and has carried National Association of Securities Dealers Series 7, 24, and 4 to manage options traders. He's also a member of the National Speakers Association, Organizational Development Network, and Association for Critical Thinking. He and his wife, Paula, live in Greene, Ohio, and have 2 adult sons. So early in a show, you often try to establish credibility for your guest or the speaker. I think we've done that and then some, in this case with Robb. So we're just really excited to have him. And despite all those things that we just talked about, I think those things are great and they matter to people who are listening. But ultimately, I think what this discussion is going to be a lot more about is really who you are, Rob, and reflecting that back to everybody. And just personally, when I've met you and after I met you and gotten to know you and develop a relationship with you, your impact on my life has been so big. And I think my guess is that it's a pretty common theme for everybody who kind of bumps into you. So I'm very excited to talk with you about that. So welcome to the show, Rob.
Thank you so much, Clark. You have always been so receptive and such a fast learner that has been a pleasure to dialogue with you. And you're one of those people, Clark, that I think when someone works with you, they actually think better when they're with you. We call this embedded cognition, that we have an opportunity to think with someone. And I think the future of thinking very much is going to be in that category where we learn to think in groups, not just on our own. And up to this point in history, most managers and leaders have accomplished their stake in history by being, I am the chief thinker for this organization. And I think that went out about 20 years ago, but we haven't made the full transition to being really good at thinking in groups. And I think that's where the future really belongs. If you watch the credits of any movie and you watch the fact that it goes on for 5 minutes and there's 37 pages of credits, I think that's kind of what the future of work is going to look like. We're going to bring talented people like you and Cecily and Dave together to do a project, maybe like this podcast, except we'll do a longer term project. We'll work together, each of us using our skills and our gifts for 6 months, finish the project, and we go our separate ways. But we accumulate learning from interacting with each other, and we take that learning on to the next project. Unlike the corporate entities where that will still exist, where someone goes to work at Goodyear for 30 years. But I think we've obviously seen a tremendous diminishing of that. And I think we're going to see this further expansion of this issue of positive group thinking to create a specific outcome to a project or an endeavor. So I think if you ask me who I am, that is a very interesting identity question. And so I would just reflect back to our listeners, or to you and Cecily, what is your first source of identity? And this is a fascinating topic. Do I go back to my gender? Do I go back to my family of origin? Do I look at my educational background? Do I go back to my race? How is it that I most identify myself is one of the most fascinating questions that I think every person needs to identify and think through for themselves. So when you ask me that question, I'm going to go back that first of all, I would be open to acknowledge I'm a person pretty strong in my faith. And I would probably recognize myself first in what my belief system is in terms of my faith. And I'm not out to try and convince anyone of anything. That's just my stance, and I'm pretty firm in that and pretty comfortable with it. Not afraid to talk about it, but not trying to push it off on anyone either. And then I go to my second source, probably as being male, in the role that I'm a father and a brother and have sons. So that comes into play. And the role that plays in the family structure, all of that is probably relevant. And then I'd probably fall back to the fact that my industry or the positions I've held, I find some source of identity with that. And those men and women today, as more women are heavily involved in the workforce at higher levels, are finding a source of identity in what they do. That's why when a guy is, or any person is unemployed, they lose part of their identity. And that's where what you do as an organization plays such an important role in helping find people to become engaged in a higher level. And that therefore changes their identity. So I look at you and Cecily and say, you're kind of an identity transition group in what you do for a living. You are helping people change their identity.
So a lot of interesting nuggets in there already. And so we're identity transformation. That's the business that we're in, Cecily. Cecily, you're our marketing manager. You should be taking notes. It's pretty amazing.
Okay. Well, don't take too many notes, or I'll have to send you an invoice.
We'll gladly pay it. I think I probably owe you more than a few invoices. So
not at all.
If you wouldn't mind, I think it would be kind of fun to learn a little bit about your earlier days, your backstory. You don't have to go through it in a ton of detail if you don't want. But
I appreciate it.
this is you're our leadoff hitter, so to speak, in this series,
Okay.
and so we
Well,
discuss themes in every episode, and this one is about how to figure out what you want, of course. And so
yeah.
many people we talk to in the context of their careers, and I think that's some of the questions I want to ask you. It usually comes back to pretty quickly those discussions. Who am I? Why am I here on this earth? What am I supposed to do? And that sort of a thing. And it's so interesting to get into those conversations with people. And it's frankly, it's an honor. But I think you have to link that concept of what am I supposed to do and figuring out what I want with your core identity. I want to definitely explore that theme with you. But I think understanding that core identity, it helps to kind of go back a little bit to your origin story, if you will. So if you wouldn't mind, Rob, I'd love to hear a little bit
Yeah.
about you growing up and
Yeah.
go from
So
there.
I'll keep it brief and at a high level. And if you have something you want to dig into, feel free. But I don't want
Sure.
to bore people with this. Isn't about me in any way, shape, or form. I'm an Indiana farm boy. Uh, Grew up on 130 acres in a small village called Ligonier, Indiana. My address was Millersburg, Indiana, but Millersburg had 952 people. And last count, I think they're down to 937. And Ligonier was the big city with about 2,500 people in it. And so very rural, mile to the nearest neighbor. So it was a very rural setting. And there were a lot of really good things about that that I enjoyed. And there were a couple of downsides to it as well. But you grew up with really good people. I had the unique opportunity. There were about 14 of us that went 1 through 8 together at a small country school. So there was a really close association with all those people. That what I would emphasize about growing up in a small town, even though I was out on the farm, there was a great sense of community. As I reflect on Ligonier specifically, it taught me about the economy. I was thinking this through a little bit a couple of weeks ago for a thing I was presenting. Jane Albert, my classmate, her dad was a dentist. Linda Anderson, her mom and dad owned the drive-in. Ben Glazer, his mom and dad owned the car dealership, the GM dealership. Terry Elijah, his mom and dad owned the Chrysler dealership. Susie McDonald, her dad owned the jewelry. I mean, I could go on down the list. Craig Atz, his dad owned the furniture store. In a small community like that, everyone is either a farmer and they come into town, sell their goods to the local feed mill. They take the money and patronize the local store owners. And that's how the economy worked. So I think one of the greatest things there are two strong things in my memory of growing up in that setting, is you learned how economics work. When the crops were good and it was a good farming year, the merchants in town thrived. When it wasn't, they suffered the same as the farmers did. So there was that strong sense of community. And number two, I think in a small town, small high school, a smaller high school I think we had, my graduating class was 128, and that was after we consolidated with 2 other high schools. So that gives you some idea. The one high school we consolidated with only had 13 graduating seniors the year before we consolidated. But the thing about that is there's great accountability. In a smaller community and smaller school system, everyone knows your parents, everyone knows you, and therefore your behavior, your choices are known within the community. And therefore, I think there's a great deal of you respect that accountability and you want to live up to that. So I think there's a lot to be said for that. But I did not come, of all the people you have on this on your podcast, I think I'll call it from the humblest, the least background. Even though they were really good people, we didn't. This wasn't a highly educated community, and it was just good, hardworking people who had good hearts and were honest. And most of us back then never locked up our houses in the farming community. So it was a great trusting. There was a lot of trust there. So that was kind of the background. I liked my neighbors, but I didn't really care for farming. It was, and I was the least mechanical farm boy in the history of Indiana. Both my father and my brother were very gifted that way, and they bonded over doing those kind of projects together. I mean, they'd pull a car in the garage and change the motor over the weekend. I'm pretty sure my car has a motor. I'm not sure it's in the front or the back. It's one of those things. I just don't have those kind of interests or gifts. So I was probably a little excluded from the inside track in the family structure simply because I was different than my dad or my brother. Over time, that's worked out fine, and I've learned to reframe that as a tremendous advantage. But so those are the early essences of my childhood, and that include certainly I was anxious to take off and go to college. Went to a small private college in Springfield, Missouri. I worked my way through school at a Holiday Inn. I started out doing, I worked banquets where I'd set up and clean up banquets, and later on I became a salesperson for banquets. And later on I became an assistant manager. And my senior year of college, they actually made me the manager of a 410 room Holiday Inn on Glenstone Avenue in Springfield, Missouri. And that was also a great learning point. I'd watch family after family come in on their family vacation in the car with mom and dad in the front seat looking totally exhausted and 3 kids in the back seat hitting every moment of it, of being in the car, and watch them come in and check in. I thought, I'm never going to do this to my family. So I learned a lot of human behavior in the roles. After I left the farm, which had very little social interaction to it for me, not enough for me, I ended up in roles that gave me a lot of life experiences, and I'm very thankful for that. So after I graduated, while I was in college, met a girl from Akron, Ohio. You can figure the rest of that one out. You're smart. And came here and actually became involved in Case Farms, and kind of took off the history from that. So that's the early childhood thing. Was mainly the main theme there is small town, small community, high accountability, high trust, and lots of understanding how things work in the business world. And those are some of my favorite things that I go back to as a resource throughout life.
Right. So even though you were not particularly gifted in that farming kind of skill set or mechanically inclined, which I'm not either.
I was going to say we've often had conversations about how neither of us would survive in those conditions.
Yeah.
So.
And it's funny because I worked on a farm for 3 summers, and
Yep.
it was wonderful. I loved it. I loved the work. I loved how tired I was at the end of the day. But I also knew I did not have a gift for any of that. And so there's value in that though too. But I think the biggest value is probably the amount of how you were taught that hard work equals results, I would assume.
Yes. Yep. It definitely is true. And you don't see many overweight farmers.
That's right. Yeah, you don't.
And you eat well. Most of the time, you probably eat more on the farm than most people do all day. You've eaten more food by 11 o'clock in the morning than the average person does all day, but you work it off. So it's a good place if you like to eat.
Very true. I would love to see you work on a farm just for a day, though, Cecily.
I actually used to work at a horse barn.
Oh, that's right.
So we both did, and we both did not end up there. So that speaks volumes.
It certainly does.
But there's an interesting theme to what all 3 of us are touching base with here, and that is we were out in nature. And the average American today spends less than 7% of their time outside. And I think there's a great deal of growth that comes from being out in nature. Not only your God awareness and the wonder of nature itself, but it does something. The mind is stimulated. Lots of studies have revealed this, that when you're stumped or in a bad spot, taking a hike or a walk in the woods does wonders to restore your mental capacity. So
interesting.
That could be why you love the horse barn. Cicely, you may not love the smell, but you loved what was going on there. Yeah. Keep in mind, I was on a pig farm. We had Martin's Yorkshires, so we sold the male breeding pigs. So, by the way, I was able to clap out of sex education classes. I knew what was going on in that category pretty well. And so we sold the male breeding pigs. And so one of my jobs was to keep the area where we showed the male breeding pigs. I had to keep it spotlessly clean. So that meant shoveling lots of manure. And I've done my share of shoveling that both on the farm, and maybe that's what prepared me to shovel it on the corporate level later on.
Right. Shoveling manure is a good metaphor for life. Oh my gosh. Okay. Well, something about, and I don't know if this is true or not, but I've always felt that you were bold, Rob, and I could be wrong. Maybe you're riddled with fear and trepidation and anxiety. But when I think of your career path, you've had these businesses, and I to me, it's astonishing. And maybe you're not, like I said, maybe you're not very bold, but if you could kind of walk us quickly through some of those things that you've done, because I think it again establishes credibility. But if someone's talking to Robb Martin about, hey, what do I want to do with my life? What should I do? What is it all about? Someone with your depth and breadth of experience can call on a lot of different, life examples to help someone, along in their journey. So you could
Sure.
say, oh, when I was on the pig farm, or when I owned this thing or that thing, you can call on a lot of real life examples to help people in their journey. So if you wouldn't mind, I think that is
Sure.
fascinating.
Well, when I came to Akron, my father-in-law had a small retail operation and is doing some wholesaling in the poultry industry. They would buy in chickens, process them in the back of the building, and then put them out in the retail case after they were cleaned and processed for sale. And when I came to Akron, they were doing about $4 million a year in revenue. And over the next 12 years, we were able to really expand that. My father-in-law was a great guy. His name was Paul Orndorff, and he was very quiet, but everyone worked hard for Paul because they didn't want to let a good man down. And in a smaller organization with less than 25 people, that is often the entrepreneur's key to getting started. They work hard, the people who work with them like them, and they don't want to let them down. When you start to put a manager in between the owner and the entry level or the hard working level people, now we've got to change the dynamic of the organization. And I could talk about that at length. But my father-in-law was a great guy. Everyone loved him, but he was very quiet and not overly assertive. So when I came on the scene, he was very self-actualized is the term I would use. He very openly let me become the spokesperson for the organization. He was perfectly happy to have me do it, and he liked having me do it. He thought I was good at it. So he just turned me, and there were two or three other younger guys about my age, Barry and Mike, two of them, and kind of worked with us. And they just kind of let us take it and run the ball. And we started to grow the company. The company grew dramatically. And I remember we leveled off at about 10 million after we had grown from 4 million to 6 million to 8 million. About 10 million, we kind of leveled off. And in trying to analyze what was causing that, I was lucky. I was down at the beach and bought a book. And I give God credit for my finding the book. It was called Flight of the Buffalo. And I mentioned this at a seminar back in February of last year, of this current year. And I didn't think it was still in publication. And a guy a couple days later brought me a copy of it. So it's still in publication. But it was basically a book about a guy that owned a sausage company. When I read the book, it was like reading about myself. And he thought he had to make all the decisions for the company. And I was of a similar mindset. And when I read the book, I completely changed the way I managed. Instead of my trying to make the decisions, I started coaching people to let them make the decisions. I always made sure the decision was based around our strategy. So, and that was my main thing. I was always very much a strong strategist. But pretty soon, because we had more than one person making all the decisions, the company just boomed. Because now we had 7 or 8 good decision makers, all making decisions based around the strategy. And we grew to about 40 million in sales between the different facets of the company. And we had an opportunity to sell the company, and then we did. And then I went into, this was the low point of my career. I was a district director of operations for the Taco Bells in Northeast Ohio. And anyone who's been in fast food already knows what the challenges are to that. You can imagine the staffing levels are hard to maintain. Getting good quality people, even back then, was very difficult. So I knew I'm going to get back into business for myself. PepsiCo owned Taco Bell at the time, and they were a great company overall, but they were very lethargic. I was on level 5. To get a decision to Irvine, California and back, it could take 6 months.
Oh my!
And I was dying in that environment. I was used to making a decision in the morning and implementing it that afternoon. So I had a chance to go into the latex glove business with some people, and I ended up owning a third of a latex glove plant on the east side of Akron called North Coast Latex. We produced about 250 million latex gloves a year and wholesaled them out. And eventually we closed that out to Baxter Glove, who took that over. And so then I was trying to decide what I wanted to do with the rest of my life, which is why I've sorted through this issue that you're bringing up today. And I ended up in the brokerage industry because I always liked the stock market. My great uncle was very influential in my life. And he helped me buy my first stock when I was 14, and he was the custodian for it. So I ended up in the brokerage industry, and over a series of events, I got hired. One company hired me away from another to another. I ended up with Bank One, or Chase Bank, as it's known now, as the investment salesperson for the 14 counties around Akron. National City Bank hired me away from them to run the program for the state of Ohio, which I did for a number of years and really enjoyed that role. In the midst of all that, I had an opportunity to come as the executive director and chief operating officer at the chapel, which I would say was a distinctive and very noticeable cut in pay. But my wife and I talked about it and thought it was a chance to give back. In fact, she was very influential in my making that decision. And so I went there, and it was, in case those who would not be familiar with the chapels, a very large church in the greater Northeast Ohio area. At that time, they had 3 campuses, and I think we were running 14,000 people in attendance on Sundays, and had 167 employees and 22 ministers on staff.
Wow.
So if you've not worked with a group of ministers, you've missed a great learning opportunity in life. So on more than one occasion, I heard, well, I did it because God told me to. Well, that's kind of a hard thing to put in your HR policies and manuals. I had to work my way through some of those issues, but it was a great group of people, great learning opportunity. I've often said it was like having my own little laboratory to put my organizational development theories into practice. And it was a great opportunity. As a result of that, the chapel was very well resourced and very generous with other nonprofits and smaller churches. They would often have me go out to do strategic planning with organizations. And after I did that for a group several times, at the end of the evening, the business owners who sat on the board for the church or the small nonprofit would come to me and say, what you did here tonight, I need done at my business. So pretty soon I had an ongoing list of people I was strategic planning and leadership development for. And eventually I just kind of spun that off and went to my own consulting practice. And the chapel was getting ready to make a change. They were going to go to having an executive pastor that would serve the role of the business side. And I was not a pastor, I was a business person, and openly acknowledged that, helped them find the replacement, and then went to my own consulting practice. And that's when MindShift was pretty much started. I started doing this in 1999. I don't think I used the name MindShift until 2002, but I was basically doing that business entity in that setting. And I really enjoyed the consulting side. And First Energy, someone came to a seminar that I did from First Energy. And next thing you know, I got a call from a recruiter, and they ended up using me as a consultant at the nuclear division of First Energy to solve some people problems. And the Perry-Nuclear Power Plant, out of the 100 nuclear power plants in the country, I think was 97th in terms of its proficiency, as rated by the International Nuclear Power Organization, or called INPO for short. And it was all around people issues. So I was heavily incented to help solve the people issues. And it was a fascinating place. I'd never been in a nuclear plant. I would just say to those who are listening, I am much more comfortable with nuclear power, having been there, than I ever was before. I wasn't uncomfortable before, but in the nuclear world, they track everything very closely. Everything is monitored. It is phenomenal as to where solar panels that we have at our homes, no one is regulating where those go when they are through being used. And that makes me pretty nervous. At least in the nuclear, we know where every ounce of everything has been stored and for how long it may carry some harm to the environment. As to where these panels on the roofs, that scares me about them getting into the environment. But that's a side story. We can go off on that some other time on another topic. But anyway, I found nuclear very fascinating. And for 7 years, and when I left, I'm proud to say that the Perry-Nuclear Power Plant, I think it was 25th or 24th. And they had risen on a rating from a 4 to a 3 to a 2. And I think they're on the verge of at a 1 level. So it was a great learning experience. So after that was concluded, I have been doing coaching and leadership development. I currently have probably 7 major clients that I do all their leadership development for their executives in groups 5 to 12. And then I continue to teach, as you mentioned at the beginning of the broadcast, at the University of Akron. I've been teaching strategic management at Kent for almost 10 years. And I absolutely love doing what those things are. So I'll go back to your original question. It took me a long time, and this is really important point that I want to make to the listeners. Each of you have a gift, but you don't even realize it's a gift at this point. So, for example, it's a gift. I can sit in a meeting and not say a word, watch what's going on, listen to the tone of the words. I don't know what all it is that I tend to pick up on. Um, at the end of the meeting, they would pay me large amounts of money to go back to the executive leadership team and say, okay, guys, here's what's going on.
Mm.
Or guys and gals, here's what's happening. I could read the room and the dynamics going on. For many years, I thought, well, that's obvious. Everyone sees that. I didn't realize that not everyone does, and that I had a gift. Every person listening has a gift, but you don't realize it's a gift because you think, well, everybody can do that. And it's not until that moment that you realize, oh, not everyone can do that, that you'll learn to leverage that gift in the way that is the most helpful to mankind. And that's
Mm.
one salient point I would want people to walk away from this thought process with. That is,
Hmm.
you've got to realize that thing that I do that I think everyone can do, you're probably mistaken. I can guarantee you not everyone can do that. And you might find that very few people can do that. And it's one of the contributions you can make to the effort that's going on around you. So that's an important point. So I think, number one, it's understanding what your gifts are and deciding who you are. And I think the way I usually phrase this in sessions, I'll say to people, if you were a medicine, what would you cure?
Hmm.
What's your purpose on being here on earth? God put you here for a reason, or if you have some other theory of how you got here, then I'm not here to argue over that. But from a biological standpoint, regardless of your theory of how how we as a people came to be, you have a purpose. And you need to get in touch with that purpose. And there's lots of ways we can do that. And I can go over some of those later if you want. But so that's my brief background. So the bottom line is I've been in wholesaling, I've been in retailing, I've been in finance, I've been in banking, I've been in manufacturing, and I've been in the nonprofit sector. And so there aren't too many situations that I walk into that I can't find some point of resonance with those dynamics. And so that's what I think brings value to what I do, because I think I have a broader concept than maybe the average person would. But I've been able to teach at the university level as well. So I guess I'd border education. I'd throw that into the role as well. And that's been one of my, I absolutely love being in a college classroom with a group of 18 to 22-year-olds, because I think it makes me a better person, a better thinker. And quite frankly, I think it makes me a better investor. I kind of have an idea what's coming down the road in the future based on what they like and what they don't like, et cetera.
Sure. So you mentioned we can go back to some of our other questions, but I wanted to pull this thread a little bit. So you said everyone here is on Earth, and God's given us all a purpose.
Yeah.
And I like the way you said, if it's kind of like if it's easy for you and hard for everybody else, that's your gift. And
you couldn't have summarized it better, Clark, as always. Great.
So, immediately when you said that, what do I think? Selfishly, I go, well, what's my gift, Rob? And I'm sure Cecily thought the same thing. But so what would you say to people? Because when you said that, that kind of immediately grabbed me. So, I mean, what would you say to someone who is, having coffee with you and says, well, how do I figure that out, Rob? How do I figure out what it is that I'm good at? How do I figure out what my gift is if it's so self-evident to me and I think everyone else has it? So I think of my wife, who's a phenomenal singer, and she thinks, oh, everyone else can do that. And I always try to explain to her, like, that is a gift from heaven. That is a gift straight from God. And I think you need to use it more.
Yeah. Good suggestion. So could you have her sing in the background on one of our shows here together? That'd be nice. Well, let me give you, I think you asked a great question. So I'm going to give you the three best answers I can give to that. Number one, start sharing what you observe, or start sharing what you think might be a gift, and watch people's reaction to it. If your wife would allow us, we'd put her in front of a group and they found out how much she enjoyed listening to her sing. She would begin to realize perhaps more what a gift it is that she's willing to accept. Number two is ask the 5 or 6 people with whom you spend the most time What do they think your gift is? You see, we don't ask that question. We'd much rather talk about the weather, about the Browns, or whatever sports team you follow, because those are safer conversations. But when I really get to be
Mm,
close enough with you, Clark, as you and I have had the pleasure of doing, I can say, well, Clark, what do you see in me? What do you think my area of giftedness might be? And my guess is,
mm,
if these are someone I've spent time with, as you and I have done numerous times, or even someone that is, a friend of mine that I go to the Browns game with,
mm.
if it's really a friend, there's a key phrase there. They'll be able to talk about that with me. If they, now, I'll give you an example. I gave this assignment to an executive, and one of his friends came back and said, "Your main gift in life is consuming alcohol." Well, I said, "You know what that tells you?" And the guy said, "Well, no, what? I should drink more?" I said, "No. It tells you your friend isn't comfortable enough with you
Mm,
to talk serious issues.
mm,
He wanted to go to the comedy relief
mhm.
rather than really talking heart to heart. So he may not be as close of a friend as you think. Now, some people will just do that for slapstick, but it also says that they weren't willing to get down to a deep level
Yeah,
and talk about us
yeah,
and who you really are, because they just aren't comfortable with that.
right.
So that's number two. And then number three, there's lots of things you can do in terms of assessments and et cetera and so forth. You're probably aware of some of those. I have a list of those, but they can help you find what your gifts are. Um, well, we'll get to that later. But yeah, those are the three things I would suggest. And two of those three involve social interaction.
Right. So
And
do you,
sometimes we're afraid to ask for that.
yeah. And it seems to me like the more you try, there's probably a correlation between the more you try, the more you do, the more you ask, the more you seek, the more answers and feedback you're going to get, and you'll get closer and closer to what you're on earth for.
Yep, I agree with you. Good summary.
Hmm. Okay.
So social interaction is always, and that's where it goes back to what is life about? It's about the relationships.
Hmm.
When I am no longer on this earth, the only thing that will remain behind me of any value is the relationships that I had. And so
Hmm.
I look at even my relationship with my clients, my relationship with business owners, my relationship with people from church, my relationship with my neighbors, you know. And here's the point that I would just tie in here: a relationship never dies.
Hmm.
I had a great relationship with my grandfather. He died 45 years ago. His relationship with me still impacts me daily.
Hmm.
Until I'm long gone, our relationship will still be alive and well and be impacting me. So you think about the relationship you and I have had, that will never die until we're
Hmm.
both gone. And maybe then things I've shared about you with my next generation, or vice with you with your next generation, will have some impact that carries on even in ways that you and I are aware of. So it's a
So,
fascinating concept, I think, to think about that everyone you touch base with, that actually your relationship will never die.
Rob, I don't know exactly how to formulate this question, but I feel led to ask it. So, I feel like you in particular have served a very unique um, purpose in my life, and it seems to me, listeners don't quite understand the context of our relationship, but Rob and I met when he was teaching a certification class at the University of Akron. I was taking that class at probably not one of the high points of my life, I would venture to say. And then you and I kind of chatted, got to know each other a little bit better, developed a relationship. And then, my goodness, it's been like 7, 8 years, and it's the weirdest thing. You pop in at these times where I go, that's not an accident. I mean, it's the craziest thing. And as an example, you helped me land a job one time. There's times where I bump into you, and it was completely unplanned in the middle of a busy office building, and all this crazy stuff. So I felt that you've been very instrumental in my life in probably more ways than you even realize. But how does that happen? I mean, do you just open yourself up to that and say, God, whatever you want me to do, just tell me and I'll do it? Are you even aware of that about yourself? Maybe you aren't even aware of that about yourself. And your purpose, I think, is almost to help other people, make steps in their journey.
First of all, Clark, thanks for sharing that. And yeah, I feel a very strong thing about my relationship with you, and I've been blessed with a number of other people in life that I've gotten to have. Maybe not the same relationship, but had some similarities to how you and I communicate, and that's what makes life meaningful to me. So I think my goal every day is, who is it that I need to be impactful to today?
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes that's a student sitting in a classroom. Sometimes that's an executive sitting across the table from me during a coaching session.
Yeah.
And sometimes that's just a person I meet sitting at the car dealership waiting for the oil change in my car. And so I think that's an open dialogue. And sometimes, I think God prepares us for those. He has led me into specific areas of knowledge and insights that I really enjoy. It's an area I find fascinating. And if I can be a guide to someone else, if I can help them pay attention to the issues going on in their life in a way that helps them reframe those to make them walk away with a better perspective, that makes me feel like I've really fulfilled part of my purpose in being here. So yeah, it's a great, thank you for your words of kind encouragement. And that could be one of those gifts that I think everyone could, or should do that, but maybe they just don't take the time. Or is it a gift that God's given me? I'll give God credit for it and move on from there, but I certainly don't deserve the credit for it.
Well, regardless, I'm thankful for it, and I'm thankful for you. But, it's just such a startling thing when I think about it in totality, about all the times where we've happened to run into each other, or you call me at this time where I'm at a very low point. And I think everybody needs a Robb Martin in their life. And it makes life worth living, to your point. And it helps people. I mean, there's no other way to say it. It helps people move forward in their journey. And which brings me to my next question for you, is that, do you think we are all seeking at one level or another? You've had the unique privilege to interact with folks at you said the student level, 18 years old, fresh out of high school, all the way up to seasoned executives who I think I have a heart for folks who are in those kinds of roles, celebrities, executives, folks like that, because they have to always present that they have everything together, when I've seen their human side, if you will. And I have to believe that those folks, even in those kinds of levels of prestige and influence and power, are still truly seeking, and maybe they peel back the kimono a little bit for somebody like you, Robb.
Yeah, one of my favorite people was Peter Raskin, the CEO of National City Bank. And I would, to say that he and I worked together makes me sound like I was much more important than I really was. I did have the opportunity to speak frequently to groups of bank employees, and often he and I shared the stage. So even though I interacted with him occasionally in the corporate level, we interacted more often in that non-corporate setting, even though we were addressing people. But he was always, I'd say he and I only had maybe 8 or 9 extensive conversations. We exchanged, hello kind of thing numerous times. But and what I loved about Peter, in every one of those conversations, somehow he made it more about me than about him. And I think that's one of the signs of a great leader. The narcissism leader of the 1950s and 1960s is just, that model is so far from what the world needs today. We need the confidence, but we need the person who has the human interest. So Kim Scott wrote a great book recently called Radical Candor. And it's a great book in saying that I care enough about you to tell you the truth of what I see. But I do it in a loving enough way that you can accept it and learn from it and grow. And I think that's the future. Not only is the future of work, what we see in those movie credits will come together in teams, but my role is to help the people become close enough in that short-term setting that they can be honest with each other about their opportunities for improvement, but do it in such a way they actually become closer, not distance from each other. So I think that's one of the roles that I really enjoy playing. When I get with a group of people, I just had a group of 12 people from a large construction company, and we were together. I've been meeting with them now for 4 sessions, but I told them I want them to bring, this last session, I want you to bring your story with me. Give me the 3 high points of your life and the 3 low points. And what I'd planned to be about a 45-minute session turned into almost 2 hours. And one 27-year-old burly executive who's a fast rising star sobbed in front of the group for almost 3 minutes. And other people and the support that came around them. And finally, one of the guys that's not afraid to voice much of anything turned around and says, "I feel like I'm at an AA meeting." And I said, this is cathartic because we've got to learn. Here's the bottom line of all this to say this. It's really hard to hold bad feelings against someone when you know their story. I may not take you in as my best friend when I know your story, but I'm going to have a hard time having bad feelings about you when I know your story. I may still find characteristics about you I'm not fond of, but when I understand why you are the way you are or what your story brought you to, all of a sudden now, if I have any empathy at all, I can begin to relate to you because we all have those parts of our life that, as you said, we kind of like to keep hidden behind the kimono. And the real transparency and the real truth comes when I can get a group of people to start to share those things with each other. Now we've opened up. I care enough about you to tell you this, that it's the truth. I've used this example numerous times, embarrassingly enough for me. But when my children were growing up and they were misbehaving in a restaurant, I would confront them because I cared about their future behavior. I was going to be living with their behavior the rest of my life. When I saw children at another table misbehaving, I usually didn't go confront them because I care about them as humans, but I wasn't planning on living with their behavior the rest of my life. So I didn't care enough about them to confront them. So I only confront the people I care about. Now, if you look at it in that context, suddenly the ability to talk to people about the things that need to be talked about becomes a relationship builder rather than a relationship destroyer. And too many people in the workplace view, I can't confront them on this, it will ruin our quote unquote relationship. Well, if that's where you are, you have a pretty fragile relationship to begin with.
Interesting. So it's interesting also, Rob, because we've had discussions with other folks who I think at least 2 times, maybe 3 or more, brought up this topic of vulnerability in different contexts. But that, to me, so this whole concept of this podcast was, hey, let's help people figure out how to find their place in the world, because that's a big theme in my life. When people come to me for advice, and I never feel qualified to help, but people come to me often about, hey, what should I do? What should be my next step? It always comes back to these existential topics of, Clark, why am I here? What's my purpose? All that kind of stuff. And I mean, my gosh, what an honor to have those discussions with people. But we've, discussed vulnerability so much on this podcast that I'm kind of wondering if that's a secondary or maybe even the primary theme, not finding your place in the world. So I've been very open and very vulnerable with my team as an example.
Yes, you have. I admire that about you. I would just insert here, I was lucky enough to be a part, as you know, Clark, but for those listening, a part of Clark's corporate offsite with his staff and his board back in January, early February. And it was one of the most impressive offsites I've been at because of that fact, Clark, that you are transparent. And some people say they're open book, and they're only open in the first 5 pages of the book. The rest of it they keep sealed off. And what I love about you and in our relationship and in your relationship with your staff and your board is you are an open book and you're willing to share those feelings, which lets everyone progress at a much faster pace than they would otherwise, because we can talk about the hard things.
Well, thank you. And that's the thing for me is I've asked others, what's the balance, Rob, between, as a leader, especially between vulnerability, expressing that, humanizing yourself, allowing people to know who you are so they can understand your story and then care about you, versus showing strength? What's the balance? When do you not be vulnerable? That's something that I think a lot of folks will struggle with too, is when do I share, when do I not share, how much should I share? I think I default to being more open than most people I know. um, that works, I think, for me, but I also don't know if that has a negative impact on my team or not. I don't know. They haven't told me as such, but I'm just curious about that for me
Yeah.
selfishly, but also all of our listeners, our
So let
millions of
me,
listeners.
yeah. And to my mother who's listening to this, I'd like to say, no.
That's right.
And I only wish my mother could listen to this. She's long gone. But anyway, let me answer this for you, Clark, and for those listening. Is trust is willing to be vulnerable to the actions of another.
Mm,
So vulnerability is built into that trust factor. And when I am being vulnerable by sharing some part of my life with you, I can do that to the point that I am doing it to help you understand me, not trying to brag or not trying to reposition myself in your eyes. If I'm sharing something because I think it will make me look more important, more significant, and we're all searching for significance, but if I'm doing it for that reason, I'm not doing it for the right reason. Now, in response to your specific question, with a staff your size, your transparency is fantastic. If you have
mm,
managers between you and the people you currently have a one-on-one relationship with, and because of your office situation, I know how you
mm.
work, you still have that. But if you ever become in a larger physical setting where you don't have that one-on-one eye contact, or they don't have a direct relationship with you,
Yeah.
now sharing too much could be not as strong of an enhancement as it is right now. So you may
Mm,
remain transparent with your inner circle, but too much transparency with people on the very front line may be too much.
mm. Okay. So as there's another layer in your organization, it might be time to uh, stay vulnerable, but not with everyone inside your organization.
So here's what you're setting the pattern for. By you being vulnerable with your direct reports, they will hopefully model being vulnerable with their direct reports.
Okay.
That's how you maintain the spirit of your organization going forward. But you're being skipping the manager level to be vulnerable with the frontline person. You want your manager to be vulnerable with them. So you're going to model that with them so they carry it down to the next level.
Mm. And by virtue of doing that and embodying that practice, then we all, your entire organization then has the freedom to express their feelings, their thoughts, their desires, their vulnerabilities. Obviously, everyone knows each other on a deeper level. It becomes about much more than work, I would say.
Yeah, yeah, indeed. When you can start to share your observations with people that are basically communicating to them they have room for improvement, the organization benefits and they benefit. And if they know that you care about them, they'll receive that and take it to heart.
Mm. Hmm. Okay. For those of you who don't remember, Rob is an absolute expert in all things organizational health and design and those sorts of things. And so we're talking about things that he is probably uniquely gifted in. So whenever I talk to Rob about these topics, I go, "Oh my gosh, I didn't even think about it that way." And I don't always 100% agree with what Rob says. It's usually 100%. But even if I go, I know. But I go, you know what? I learned from that. And here's a time I disagreed with you, Rob, and you ended up being right. Um, you said at our retreat, the next person we hire needs to be different from the rest of the team. Their psychological
Mhm.
profile needs to be different because we were all too similar. I had private conversations with folks. What do you think of that feedback from Rob? To a person, everyone said, you have a very special thing going here. Don't shake it up at this point. Lo and behold, um, long story short, we ended up hiring a person whose psychological makeup and profile and gifts could not be more different from the rest of us. But his values and his core beliefs were radically aligned with the rest of us.
Yes. Yeah.
And because of your encouragement, I fought it. I did. I fought it. But then I thought, if Robb's telling me to do it, I need to listen to it. And so we went out and we hired that person, and it couldn't have gone better for us as an organization. And I can see exactly why you gave that guidance. So I think through issues of disagreement, it wasn't conflict at all, but it was just a disagreement.
Yeah.
I never took any of that personally, but because this is your gift and your level of insight is so much more significant than mine, I said, who am I to argue with that? And ended up listening, and I couldn't be happier with the result. But that's just an example, I think, of it's just so interesting as I'm hearing you. I think I'm learning as we're going, and I thought I had to share that. That's just one example of where I've said, okay, Rob's
But
right.
what you said
I didn't
is
agree,
a key here.
but
You had your values aligned, but we had diversification of personality. So that's the key. If my values are
Right.
aligned with this group, we can harmonize even though we're different. And then we create something powerful by being different.
And we've been able to deploy that new hire in ways that none of us would have imagined. And I said, would you want to do what he's doing right now to other team members? And they said, oh no, I'd rather die than do what he's doing right now, because nobody's comfortable in those situations. Nobody. I can flex any which way, but I don't relish the role that we've assigned to that new hire. But he relishes those opportunities and those interactions, and he's so pumped up to do it. He's like a caged animal. And so we just, we let him go. And it's the most amazing thing to know that there's somebody out there who is switched on at the thought of doing things that you are not excited about.
Yeah.
And I think that's the level of insight that you gave to our team and me, and I'm just so grateful for that. So I don't know if that's an endorsement for you or your business or whatever, but that's a long tangent, but I had to share that.
I'm so glad to hear that. That makes my day. But see, this goes back to your willingness to be open-minded and to dialogue with other people. So there's a lot of credit to you for being willing to think in those terms, and I'm glad to hear it's working well.
Oh my gosh, yeah, we couldn't be happier, right, Cecily? Would you say?
Yeah, we are so happy. No, I'm just kidding. Yeah, no, it does make a huge difference. Having that one person who, it's not even that they don't fit in, it's that they just are thinking outside of the box that we all are in. And we can't make ourselves think outside the box, and we needed that.
100%.
There's a good phrase that I use with companies often, and this would apply at any level of the size of the organization. But the performance of the system depends more on how the parts interact than on how they act independently. So the performance of the system would depend on how well your team interacts than on how they act independently. So Cecily could be the greatest market manager on the face of the earth and excel. I mean, she's nationally known for her marketing, but if she doesn't interact with the rest of the team, the team isn't going to thrive. So that's what I like about this radical candor. Until we learn to have all the parts of the organization interact, and the way I usually say this, until I can bring the water cooler conversation into the conference room, we're never going to reach our full potential.
Interesting. What do you think about the concept of freedom, Rob, in the context of work? Freedom is one of the core values at Arrowhead, our company. And I don't want to give our employees unfettered freedom, but I truly believe that if they're in the right seat, their values align, that sort of thing, that they should have as much freedom as possible to do their jobs and latitude to make decisions as possible, as long as, again, they're aligned with our values and our strategy and those sort of things that you've outlined before.
Sure.
But I feel like that kind of links to this concept of identity as well. One object lesson here is Cecily, and I don't want to put you on the spot, but you're 23, which is amazing to me because I've known you for how long? 4 years? 3 years?
4.
You have grown. I mean, I can't even imagine what you have done in 3 or 4 years here at Arrowhead is mind-boggling. But, and I'm not trying to give myself any credit here, it's all for you. But we have given you about as much freedom as we possibly could. You've made some mistakes along the way, but honestly, you went from managing our social media, and I said, okay, I don't want to do that anymore. You do that full time. I don't even have the logins anymore. And then you changed our website, and then you started recruiting, and now you're managing all of our company projects. You handle all of our events. You're doing advertising campaigns. You're helping with this podcast, on and on and on. And so if I think about it, you're just one person here at this company who we've said, go for it, just do it. What, I don't know if I'm making any sense with this question, but that seems to me that this notion of freedom is very much tied to helping people find again what they're good at. And to her credit, because we're so open with one another,
Yeah.
Cecily will say, I don't want to do that. If she doesn't like it or if it doesn't line up. But I feel
Cecily's real good on this podcast.
But I think you get what I'm driving at. I know her well enough too to say, go ahead, please.
Yes. Yeah. See, she knows you care about her, and she cares about Arrowhead and about you. So therefore, you can accept that kind of open dialogue and feedback that makes the organization thrive. If this were a high command and control, you just say, Cecily, do this. And if even if it's something she doesn't feel she has the expertise for, she would go out and do it, feeling she had to. So the point you're asking is a great question, because it's a perfect segue to bring this in that everyone has 3 levels. They want to, first of all, find their purpose. And then secondly, they want to feel that it's something they have a passion for, and purpose and passion are a good sequence to each other. Sometimes we have a passion, it becomes a purpose. Sometimes we have a purpose, it becomes a passion. But once we establish those 2 things, we want to master it. We want to become really good at it. We call it mastering. I want to know that I'm as good as I can possibly be in this specific arena. If it's electrical engineer, they want to know they're the very best electrical engineer possible, etc. And we only do that when we get the freedom to master it. And that's why this freedom that you give your staff is so important, because they have purpose, they have passion. Now they can become masters in their specific area, which a person who feels like they're masterful in the role stays with the company longer, has greater life satisfaction, and takes greater pride in what they're doing. So this freedom is a very important issue that you're giving. We look at the famous 3M example. They used to give everyone their 15% time to work on something they were interested in. Google gives people 20% time to work on projects they're interested in. And you look at either one of those companies, the things that have come out of 15% time at 3M and 20% time at Google is amazing. It leaves in the dust the things they've done on regular time, because people want that feeling of mastery, but they have to have freedom to do it. In other words, for example, I work really well early in the morning. I'm a morning person. I go run first thing, I get some good dopamine releases, and then I sit down and start thinking through what it is I need to do or accomplish for the day. Some people are night. My wife is a night person. She does her best thinking on those kind of things. I woke up this morning and she had a list of things that she had researched on a project she and I are kind of working on together. That's just how it functions in that way. So, but you want that sense of mastery, and you only can achieve that when you have the freedom to pursue it.
Interesting. Does this resonate with you at all, Cecily? I don't know. And I don't want to badmouth you. You don't have the benefit of a 20-year career either to compare and contrast, different companies and experiences with this one. So what would you say about that from your perspective?
Well, in thinking about this and talking about the freedom, it kind of led me to what I've noticed in the past. Well, with my generation, probably the generation before me is now, they are less, in that my career is everything, and all I do is I just work, and that is what I do, and all my identity is in my job. And I think we're starting to move past that, where people are like, well, yeah, I have a job, but then I have an identity outside of that. And I think it's a little bit different at Arrowhead, because I think a lot of us have a passion for Arrowhead, and I think we found our passions and we're able to put that into that job. But I think we are nearing more towards my generation and the next, where they don't want to just have a job or work somewhere where, and that's not, they don't want that to be their identity. So I guess that's a question for you, Rob, of when you talk to individuals about their identity or what they're, wanting to do in their lives, does it start out with their work, or are they kind of trying to figure that out and then they want to find something? They want to find their work, they want to find their job after they find their identity, or is it flip-flopped?
Yeah. That's a great question, Cicely. Thanks for asking it. There are three main areas that I involve people in helping them discover what their real purpose is. Often, and I won't go through all the steps because I would have to invoice you if I did, and your listeners, so I don't want to do that. But anyway, the first step is I often ask them, what is 25 things about which you are curious? So what are the things in life about which you are curious? For some people, they can whip that list out in 10 minutes. Others take days. I just met with a young person. She's not young. She's a middle-aged. She has two high school children. But it took her 2 weeks to put together the list of 25 things she's curious about. And this person, one of her problems is she has no time to think. I'm trying to get her to give 20 minutes a day to just free thinking time. And it's almost impossible for her, she thinks. So it is 25 things about which you're curious. And we start to develop that then, to develop the areas that usually will help me start to uncover somewhere in that list, or combinations of the things on that list, put me into a theme, which helps us uncover their purpose. So that's always a fun exercise. The other thing I do is I use some things I put 2 or 3 books of information together some years ago. And I use this with college students and a couple of other seminars I do. And I have them start out with a list of things they love doing. And that's always fascinating, the things they come up with. And I'd have to make a lengthy list of the things you love to do. Well, all right, some students love playing video games. Okay, put that on your list. That's fine. And then we start asking 5 other questions which help them filter what are those things that they could enjoy doing and yet still get paid for it. And we start to help develop that into a career choice. So those are 2 very organic ways of coming up with areas of purpose. And I've used both of them successfully numerous times. So it takes some additional steps and we work through it together, but it can be a very powerful tool. The third way is obviously, as most people are aware, is some kind of a career assessment. I use Harrison assessments in this arena. They're expensive. The assessment runs about $600. But it is well worth it. Recent example, young lady living in Florida, and she graduated from college, great grade average, done some social work while she was working her way through college, and she had an opportunity to go to work for, it wasn't an FBI, but it was a quasi-FBI. It was still a government type of role. She was going to be stationed in D.C. She was going to work long hours, and her parents said, we're just not sure this is right for her. She kind of wanted to go and do it just to get started. So they arranged for her to take the Harrison, and it gave her a list of 62 different jobs which had 70% higher job satisfaction. In other words, all of those jobs could give her at least 70% job satisfaction. And in the top 5, one of them was being a lawyer. And she says, that's funny. I actually thought about that when I was a kid. I thought I might want to be a lawyer. And because she's involved in the social work, suddenly it all came together. She is currently at Notre Dame getting her law degree. She is about 6 months away from graduation, and she wants to represent children. So this is a passion for her. She did the social work and saw children, the plight children fell into. I've witnessed this personally. I'm willing to bet you and Cecily know someone in a similar situation, but I'll go specifically, and I won't go to names, of course, but a friend, they had one daughter, and ended up having, she was married and had a child, a beautiful little girl. And when the little girl was about 3, the father of the little girl decided he didn't want to be married anymore, and took off for Tennessee, and there was a divorce, and et cetera. So 5 years go by, and this little girl's in second grade, if I remember correctly, and totally out of the blue, the mother dies in her sleep. It wasn't in her sleep; she was found dead on the floor of the house. And I'm on the board of the school that she was attending. That's how I know this story.
Mm.
And a teacher had to pull this little girl into a conference room and try and explain to her that she would never see her mommy again. Now, you think about 8 years old. She was very close to her grandparents. Her grandparents kept her during the day until she went to school. So all of a sudden now there's this interesting dilemma. The father, who is pretty much estranged to her, is now the legal guardian. Legally, he has the right to that little girl. He's the biological father. Yet she's lived with her grandparents, are the closest people to her. Well, who represents the rights of that child? And unfortunately, a judge is stuck with a tough decision. Seems like a decent person sitting in front of me who is the biological father. Here are the grandparents who are heavily invested in their child. Who is best? For this little girl to be with. So, and I'm not, it's a sad story, and I saw it up close. But now is in law school, and she is studying she wants to be the person who can help represent the child in what the child really wants, because otherwise the child doesn't have much of a voice. A good judge may ask the child, but probably filters what they say by the fact that they're 8 years old. So those are a good practical example where the Harrison has been a wonderful tool. And there are others out there. I'm not out to promote. I do use Harrison. I'm certified with them and all the other good things, but there are other good ones. But I like that one because it gives you a lengthy list, and it gives you a lot of the paradoxes in your life that I think are helpful to become aware of. But so those are three things that I've used to help people find, what is this purpose? Why did God put me here? And if I were a medicine, what is it I'm supposed to cure? And I think those are important things, because once I know my purpose, I can align it with my passion, and I can create mastery. And then I can get to a state of really giving it my full focus, which is another issue that I work with people a lot on, is when do we reach a state of deep thinking? So just ask the two of you, when was the last time you had an hour and a half to sit and think deeply on something without interruption?
What do you think,
And
sis?
if you have,
When was the last time?
Yeah.
I don't know.
have you ever had?
I don't know if I ever have even done that.
Yeah,
if
I would
you-
say, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Clark. Sorry.
I can't remember the last time. I make long drives for work. But even then, this is probably an indictment of me. I probably think, oh, I need to be on the phone talking to someone for a work call. I need to be listening to a podcast. I don't want to waste, quote unquote, waste this 2-hour drive. I need to be learning something or talking to someone. So even then I'm, in a car, I'm distracted because I want to be. So,
And you need to be.
yeah, but so I don't know. I guess that's a really good question.
Well, to your indictment, I can't think of how many times you and I have talked while you're driving from one place to another. So, and I enjoy those conversations, so I'm glad that we have the conversation. But so here is, because I care about you and because I want to practice what I'm talking about, I'm going to give the two of you an assignment. Are you willing to accept
Okay.
it?
Yes.
Cicely? I want you
Are you willing?
to
Yeah,
go
I'm
on
just
a
shaking
walk
my head
or
here.
a
People are
hike.
listening. That's not.
Okay.
I want you to go for a walk in a wooded area or on a trail. But before you leave, I want you to plan to be gone an hour and a half, and I want you to leave it. What is it I'm going to think on while I'm taking this walk? You can think that. I want you to have here's the thing I'm going to think on. And every time your mind starts to stray, come back. No, I'm not thinking about that right now. I'm thinking on this. And I just want you to give a report back to me on what you accomplished in that thinking during that hour and a half walk, hike, run, bicycle ride. I'd rather you walk, because when you're bicycling, you're kind of like driving. You have to be aware of what's happening around you. When you're going for a walk in the woods, you really don't need to be aware too much other than tree stumps and roots in your way. And see what you accomplish with that time. That's a good challenge for you. But remember, I want you to leave with something already implanted that I'm going to think on while I'm doing this. And you have to discipline yourself to keep thinking on that topic, issue, or challenge. So in the next 10, I'll give you 12 days. How's that sound? I'll give you 12 days. In the next 12 days, that's your assignment. Okay?
Yes, sir. I can handle that. I think that'll be fun. Thank you.
And take your wife or kids with you, Clark.
Okay.
This is think time. Okay.
Okay.
I don't know if you're gonna have clear thinking.
If I keep my 4-year-old with me, I'll definitely not have time for clear thinking. Yes. Okay, so if you were to sum this up, to determine where you're supposed to go or who you're supposed to be, requires thinking time, experimentation, freedom, and something I wasn't quite ready for, but constant dialogue with other human beings to help you determine that gifting and, by extension, the direction you should take your life. Would that be a very quick and dirty kind of summation of this?
I think that's an excellent summary. I want to do lots of social interaction. I want to get lots of feedback. And then I want to start to put together experimentation on what I think I'm really passionate about. And usually passion and purpose, sometimes purpose comes before passion, sometimes passion before purpose, but they come together pretty quickly. And then you want to achieve mastery, which you need the freedom to do that.
Robb, is there anything you'd like to plug before we let you go here?
The biggest thing I would plug is just for the development of the people listening is to, and I've said this, I'm repeating, and I know that, but it's worth repeating. Take the thing that you think is easy and look around and see if other people have a hard time doing it. And then consider, is that a gift that I've been given? And if so, how can I use it for the good of mankind? And if you're using it for the good of mankind, you will be enhanced and feel a greater sense of purpose as well. So here's a statement I'll throw out as a kind of concluding remark. Could we start out with identity? Identity is not something you inherit. It is something you discover.
Identity is not something you inherit. It is something.
Yeah, I may have inherited my race. I may have I didn't have any choice in my gender, but my identity is something I discover. It didn't get handed to me. And way too many people think this is just, it inherited who I am. They don't try to discover it. And that's the point that I would most encourage your listeners to do, is to go out and actually discover it. Don't just think that you're locked into where you are with your DNA.
I love it. Well, Robb, thank you so much for what has been a very enlightening time. And I never know where it goes when we talk, but I'm always grateful for time with you. And thank you for sharing one of your many gifts with our listeners.
Thanks for the opportunity. It's always good to be with you, Clark. And Cecily, I just look forward to watching you continue to grow and mature. And so I'm looking forward to that next retreat we have with Arrowhead, and I think to see what everyone has done with what we talked about last year. That will be exciting.